The following is a video tutorial for how to create the train body for the model miniature train. So real quickly here, I'd just like to start off by taking a look at the two views that Project Lead the Way has provided for us to help create this part. There are a number of different things that we're looking at here that are going to be important in terms of making this part come to life. I also just wanted to direct your attention to some of the notes that we see on here. This one down here says, no, all holes are drilled with point angles. So we know that when we're putting in a hole in Inventor, there's two options for what kind of point, or if it should be a flat bottom. This is telling us that we want angles to be down there. So these drilled holes that are on the left and right side of the train body, just keep that in mind for in the future. Also, we have another note over here that round all edges to a 0.1 radius except for any drilled hole. And so you actually can't see those rounded edges in either of these two views here. You actually have to scroll up a little bit to the assembly view here, the exploded view, and you can see that these rounded edges here pretty much everywhere on the part except for any of the drilled holes. I think we also get a nicer view of that as well towards the bottom here. You can see here in the assembled view. Again, just these round edges here pretty much throughout the part. So scroll back up and see what else we need to take a look at here. These drilled holes, which will be 2 on this side and 2 on the opposite side, are a 1/4 20 UNC. It has a depth of 0.875 inches, and so that times 4 there, that x4 is telling you that there's 4 of them. 2 on this side, 2 on the other side. There is another hole here at the top. This one we can actually just make a circle and extrude cut it into this tube piece here that will have a diameter of 0.5 and a depth of 1/4 of an inch. And then we also kind of have this little circle here which will also have a straight part added to the end of it, which we will extrude cut from the back side of this train body as well. My approach for this is going to be as simple as I can possibly make it. I'm going to start off by making an initial sketch of this rectangle plus this circle profile, and I will extrude it back at this given distance here, and at that point I will then create another sketch at the end of this solid model here after I've extruded it, and then make this profile that we see over here in this view. And then I'll extrude that backwards a little bit more. It'll actually end up being 1.75, that number that I see right here. And then from there I'm just going to start to peck away at it and cut out the holes and put the little holes on the front here for the cow catcher to be attached to and all of that good stuff. So why don't we just go ahead and get started. I'm going to switch over to my Inventor here, make a new file. English standard inch part is what I want, and I'm going to say create. And next I'm going to then go ahead and start creating a sketch. I'm going to pick this plane right here, drop down my origin point to the lower left hand corner a little bit to give myself some room to work with, and I'm going to start putting in my geometry. Coming back over to my documentation, I can see that this rectangle piece here will have a bottom of 2 inches from one side to the other, and it will have a dimension going in the up direction of 0.875 that I see right here. So I'm going to go ahead and make that rectangle first. So I'm going to grab my rectangle tool here and start at the origin, dragging outwards, and that needs to be 2 inches along the top and bottom and 0.875 inches going up and down. Hit enter and have that rectangle placed there. Next I will create this circle which has a radius of 0.75 and then dimension it into place based off of what I see here. This 1.375 is telling me from the bottom to the center of this circle, that's how far it will be, and this number going straight down through here, 1 inches, is telling me that it will be right in the middle of this part here that we're creating. So I will then lay down my circle first. It has a radius of 0.75, so I'm going to go ahead and say times 2, so making it 1.5, and then dimension it into place First, I will select the midpoint of this circle here, and then select the bottom line here, and drag this dimension out and say that it needs to be 1.375. And then the second dimension I will add to this part will be from this line here to the center point, dropping it down and saying it needs to be 1 inch. Alright, now that this has been moved into position, I will trim out the unnecessary parts of my sketch, so the bottom half of that circle there and this line right here, making one unified profile, and then say finish sketch. Alright, next I'm going to have to extrude this, so I'm going to select extrude, and it automatically selects the only profile that's on the screen, and of course I need to know what distance I'm going to extrude it at. So jumping back to my documentation here, it doesn't really explicitly tell me how far from this surface to here it needs to go, but it does give me the opportunity to do some math to figure that out. So it's 5.5 inches, the whole depth of this part, the whole length of the side of this part here is 5.5 inches. I can also see here that this 1.75 is what it takes to get from the end here to where I want to go with this extrusion. So I will simply take 5.5 minus 1.75, and that'll give me the distance of my first extrude here. So I can actually type that in Inventor. Let me get my Inventor up, and I will say 5.5 minus 1.75 and say OK. So the Inventor did the math for me there, and that is what I have so far. Next, I'm going to create a new sketch on the back side of this part. So if I hit home, this is the front. I'm just going to hit the side of the cube here to rotate to the back, and I will say create a sketch, and I will select this surface here, which will then give me a plane to sketch on. Now you can see it automatically projected these lines forward for me. That's what yellow lines are signifying, a projection from a new or earlier sketch. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and look at the numbers for the back side of this part here, and it's going to be a 2-inch bottom. We know that from the front, and it will have an overall height of, and this is a little tricky here, 3.375 plus this radius of 2.35. Alright, so what I'm going to do first is lay out a line along the bottom here, and then I'll create another line from the end of that line going straight up at no particular distance. There you see that there. Next I will make that circle, which has a radius of 2.35. So 2.35 times 2, so a 4.7 circle. I will then dimension this into place by selecting the midpoint of the circle here and the bottom line here, and that needs to be 0.375. And then I will dimension the midpoint again to this opposite side line here and tell that to be 1. Alright, that jumps the circle over into position here. At this point again, I can just trim out when I no longer need. So the tops of those lines there and the whole bottom outside circle of that there, and say finish sketch. Okay, now I can extrude the rest of this, and you actually need to select both of these profiles. So I'll select the bottom half first and this top portion here, filling in the rest of that profile. And the distance here needs to be 1.75. So from the back here, or basically we're starting here and we're going all the way out the rest of the way 1.75. So I'm just going to remove my 5.5 and the minus symbol, 1.75, say OK, and there we have it. So that is basic. That is how we get the basic main part of the train set up here. We will now begin to cut into it a little bit, I need to add the switch over to this screen here. I need to add the hole on the top for the smokestack to rest into. I need these 3 holes on the front here for the cow catcher to be plugged into. I need these 4 threaded holes, 2 on this side and 2 on the other side, for the hex pegs to be screwed into, and then this cutout on the back here. I'm going to start with the hole on the top of the tube here, of the cylinder part, and that has got a diameter of 0.5, and it is extruded inwards at 1/4 of an inch, and it is telling me here that it's going to be dead center, so it's going to be 1 inch inside the middle of the part, and it's going to be off the front edge here of 0.875. So in Inventor, what I'm going to do to make sure that that new sketch and that new hole is going to be lined up properly, I have to create a level plane on top of this cylinder. So I'm going to actually add a work plane here, and we're going to use one of our other options. So this is going to be a new one for us. We're going to do a tangent to surface and parallel to an existing plane. So I'm going to select this option here. First I will select the cylinder here, and next I could select any one of these other planes and it will additionally add it onto the top of the cylinder. I personally prefer to come back and select one of the origin planes, just because I know for a fact that it is flat, and that's just the way that I think about it. So I'm going to select the XZ plane, and there it goes. It's added that new plane for us to sketch on, perfectly tangent with the cylinder and flat in terms of across the part. So that is what I'm going to do next, is select that plane to create a sketch on. Alright. Next what I need to do is I'm going to have to create a circle, and that has a diameter of 0.5. And now I need to dimension that circle into place. Well, what I can do here is project some geometry forward from underneath this plane here, and what I want to project is this front line here to give me something to dimension off the front of this part at, and I want to project this line here to give me something to dimension off the side of the part. So now that I have those lines projected, I will go center line to this line here, and that needs to be 0.875, and then I will go center point to this line here, and that needs to be 1, placing it in the middle of the part. That is done there. I will then say finish sketch. Next I can extrude and cut that circle out, and it needs to be a distance of 0.25. Okay. Now that we have that placed there, I can right click on this plane here and deselect the visibility just to get it out of the way. I'm not going to need it anymore, so sayonara. Next I can add these 3 pegs on the front, these 3 holes on the front for the pegs from the cow catcher to be inserted into. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go ahead and create a sketch on this surface here. Rotates me forward to that surface, and let's take a look at some of the placement here. These holes are all going to be 0.125 in diameter, and they're going to be extruded inwards at 0.125, and then this times 3 is telling me that there's 3 of them that we see here, 1, 2, and 3. The placement for these holes, this first one here is going to be off this corner at 0.375 going in, and 0.125 going up. This other one over here will also be 0.125 going up and 0.1625 going across. And then this third one here will be at 0.625 and 1 inch dead in the middle. So I'm going to start adding those in. First things first, so I'm going to create my 3 circles at a diameter of 0.125. So 0.125, 0.125, 0.125. And now I'll begin to dimension those into place. I'm just going to grab the center point of that one there and move it down to here. So that first one, just want to take a look at those numbers again, is going to be 0.375 from the edge to the center and 0.125 from the bottom to the center. So 1.25 from the bottom, I will dimension. And actually I'm going to move this guy above this line here because I want to dimension to that line. I'll say 0.125. And then of course from the edge here at 0.375. Okay, next up is going to be this guy here. I'm just going to move him into somewhat of the correct position, and I will dimension him off the bottom at 0.125, and then it needs to be from this edge here 1.625. So from center point to this line here 1.625. Alright, last but not least is this third whole circle here. Again, just kind of roughly move it into position. You do notice that it will pick up on certain things like midpoints and other edges and other lines and things of that nature, but I want to make sure that it is in the correct position no matter what, so I'm going to dimension it. So it needs to be off the bottom here at 0.625. So 0.625, and then from the edge here at 1 inch. Okay, now I have those three circles lined up properly. I can then extrude, cut them. Oh, I selected the wrong profile there. I'm just going to try that again. I'm going to zoom in a little bit so I get it right this time. These three here, I can select all three of them at one time. Then I will say cut, and it needs to be at a distance of 1.25 and say OK. Just gonna hit the home icon here to zoom out a little bit. So great, we're almost done. Now I can either add this section out of here and cut that out, or the hex holes. Since I am been putting a bunch of holes in here, I'm just gonna go ahead and continue on with that. First things I'm gonna do, we can place a hole in a number of different ways, but one of the ways is from Sketch. So I'm going to show you that right now. So we're going to do a from Sketch, but to do that we actually need a sketch to apply in that way. So I'm going to create a sketch here. I'm going to select this surface here. Alright, and basically what we're going to do is we're going to lay down a point. And if we lay down a point and then we go to our hole command, the hole automatically recognizes those points as places of interest, and it will immediately jump to those positions. So what we're going to do is put these points in here exactly where these holes need to be. So it's telling us here that the distance off the bottom edge needs to be 1/2 inch, 0.5, and the first hole is going to be in at 1 inch and the second one at 4.5 from the back edge here. So I'm going to do the first one first, lay down that first point there at 1 inch on the from the edge, from the side edge here, the back edge, and 0.5 from the bottom. So I will lay down a point somewhere around here and another one out there, and now I'll dimension them into place. So dimension from the point to the end here, that needs to be at 1 inch, and from the point to the bottom edge here needs to be at 0.5. And then this one here to the back edge needs to be at 4.5, and of course from the bottom at 0.5. Okay, now that I have those holes placed there, I can say finish sketch, and this is where it's going to come in handy. When I go to hole, see, it automatically picked up that those points were probably going to be places of interest for to place a hole. So we have our option here set to from sketch. We don't have to worry about any centers or lining it up because we've already taken care of that. At this point we can just think about what kind of hole we're going to be putting in here. So I'm going to jump back to my documentation here, and it's a 1/4 20 UNC, so that is a threaded hole. Has a depth of 0.875. Alright, so I'm going to switch to a threaded hole, a tapped hole here. It's the third option on the bottom. Let's switch to that. Alright, it will be just a straight down through hole, but I can change the termination here from through all to distance, and the distance of that needs to be at 0.875. If I remember correctly, yes, 0.875, and it's a 1/4 20 UNC. That is the designation that is defaulted to this setting here. We do want to make sure that we leave this angle drill point. Remember what it said here in the note section that all holes that are drilled will have pointed angles. So making sure that that option is still selected, we can go ahead and say OK. And we have 2 of our holes. Alright, so now instead of doing that whole process again of placing 2 more points and placing another hole, I wanted to show you just a way here where we can mirror some of these 2 holes to the other side of this part actually. So if I go to my mirror command here, it can then ask me for what features would you like to mirror. I can select this hole 1 from the parts list here, from the browser list. And then next it needs me to select a mirror plane. Now I don't really have a mirror plane, anything that's dead center yet. Any of my origins wouldn't really work either. So I actually need to add a plane here for myself to mirror it over. So that's not too bad. I'm going to come up to my plane options here. And I'm going to select midplane between 2 parallel planes. And essentially what I'm going to do is select this here. I can select this edge that we see here and rotate to the other side and select this edge, and it puts a plane right down the middle of my part. So now at this point I can mirror over hole 1, the mirror plane, select here and select work plane 2 and say OK. And if we take a look at the other side of our part, there are the exact same identical holes with not as much fuss as originally. At this point, I'm just going to go ahead and right click on that work plane 2 and deselect the visibility because I don't need it anymore. Next here, I'm going to sketch out this little cutaway section that we see here. It actually has a radius of 0.5 for the circle, but then the placement of that circle is 0.25, a quarter of an inch off the edge. So it's not going to ride the edge here. That should be a quarter of an inch inwards and 1.75 inches from the bottom. So I'm going to go ahead and place that in next. I'm going to say create a sketch on this surface here. I will lay down my circle first of 0.5, but that was the radius. So I'll say times 2. Give me an inch circle. Alright, next I will then dimension it into place. So from center line to the bottom here, it needs to be at 1.75. And from the center point here to this back edge, we're looking for 0.25. Okay, and now what we need to do is draw some lines here, which we will line up right in the middle of this part. And just take straight out in this direction. You'll see a little symbol with a line above it and a circle. That is telling us that the line that I'm currently drawing is going to be tangent to the circle, which is what we want. So if you don't see that symbol, make sure you move your cursor around until you get that little icon there. You can see if I pull off of that trajectory, it will disappear. So I want to make sure that it is tangent here. I will then trim off the unnecessary parts that I don't need anymore, which will be this line here, this curve here, part of that curve there, even this line here and this line here, and I will just grab my line tool again and drop this straight down to finish off that profile. I can now say finish sketch. I will then extrude cut this portion and it will go all the way through, then say OK. So we're nearly completed here. Basically I have all my holes laid out, everything is sized up appropriately. The very last thing here would be this note, which tells us to round all edges to 0.1 radius except for any drilled hole. So what that's going to look like here is I'm going to do my fillet command. Hit this little arrow here to open up my window. I will set my distance to 0.5, or was it 0.05? Or I'm sorry, it's 0.1. No fives. 0.1. And then I'm going to make my way around the part, selecting all the edges that do need to be curved. So I'm going to start down here, work my way around the front face here. So I have all those 4 edges. I'll then select this inside edge here, this outside one here, and the bottom one along there. This one inside here is actually very important. I see a lot of people miss that oftentimes. You're just going to make your way around the part, simply selecting all these lines here. Alright, I'm going to rotate around to the other side and grab some of these lines here. You can see this counter here is counting up how many lines I have selected. I'm currently at 23. I'm going to get this back side here. Make sure I get the top. And then, of course, these flat edges on the top as well. I need to grab this edge here. Alright, I'm just going to hit home real quick because my part's getting a little over-rotated. Make my way around to the bottom here and grab this last one. I'm currently at 34 selected lines. I'm just going to rotate around this part one more time, visually checking to see if I got them all, and I do believe I did. Great, so at this point 34 selected is the final number. I will say OK. It will round off all those edges very nicely, and there you have it. So one of the last things that we have to do here now is actually put the hole on the back for the hitch peg and hitch magnet to be inserted into. I can see here that it has a diameter of 0.25 and has a depth of 1/2 inch. Alright, and of course the placement here then is going to be 1 inch and 0.375. So in doing so, I'm going to go ahead and create a sketch on the back side here. I'll then make a circle at 0.25. And then I will dimension him into place, but I'm going to have to project some geometry from the side and bottom of this part here. Since those fillets are in the way, it didn't automatically bring those in, but I will need them here and now to dimension properly. So from the center of the circle here to the bottom, we're looking at 0.375. And then I can dimension from the center of that circle again to the side edge here, and that's at 1 inch. I'll then say finish sketch. I will then extrude just that circle and cut it in at 1/2 inch. Say OK, and there you have it.